to The Tangent, everyone. I'm Father Sam Kachuba, and this week I am joined by Malachy Fallon. Malachy is the executive director of the Xavier Society for the Blind. The Xavier Society for the Blind since 1900 has provided resources for the visually impaired, in particular helping to provide Catholic resources, Catholic print media, and audio media for those who are unable to see. It's a fascinating apostolate, an entirely non-profit organization. If you'd like to learn more about the Xavier Society, go to xaviersocietyfortheblind.org. You can donate, you can learn how to take advantage of the great resources that they offer, you can support the Xavier Society and their mission, and if you listen on, you'll hear just a little bit more about the great work done by Malachy Fallon and the Xavier Society for the Blind. Enjoy. Malachy Fallon, thank you very much for joining me on The Tangent tonight. It's great to be with you. Great to have you here talking about the Xavier Society for the Blind.
It's great to be with you, Father. Thanks for inviting me on.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about the Xavier Society for the Blind, because like I told you before we started recording, until I got the email saying that there was such a thing as the Xavier Society for the Blind, I did not know that there was such a thing as the Xavier Society for the Blind.
Okay. And that's why we really appreciate, having the opportunity to be on programs like this, podcasts like this, because it really does help us get the word out. Serving people who are blind or visually impaired, we can't just take out a print ad in a local paper because literally people won't see that. The people who we serve won't see it. We hope that others will, and spread the word that way, but it doesn't always happen. But Xavier Society, get back to your question, Xavier Society was founded in 1900 in New York City. We borrowed space at that time from what was then known as Xavier College, and is now Xavier High School. So that's that's where we took our name. So down on 16th Street in Manhattan. We were co-founded by a young woman, Margaret Coffey, who was blind, and she taught blind students. She basically was what we would consider a CCD teacher today. So she was teaching her students about their Catholic faith. And Father Joseph Stottleman, a Jesuit priest who was working in the area. And at the time, I read this recently, at the time he was actually working with deaf children. So I think Margaret understood that, he was involved with kids and involved with kids with disabilities, and that he would probably be a good partner for her. But she got together with Father Stottleman and they established Xavier Society. And not only was she a co-founder, she was one of our first donors. She donated $350, which then was quite a lot of money. We did a back of the envelope calculation recently, and it amounts to about $11,000 in today's money. And Xavier Society used that donation to purchase what was called a stereograph machine, which was a machine that allowed Xavier Society to produce greater volumes of books in raised print. At that time, we weren't using Braille, although Braille was around, it just hadn't been adopted yet. We were using a type of raised print, which was known as New York Point. So the purchase of the stereograph machine with Margaret Coffey's initial donation allowed us to produce more books in greater volume.
Now, you'll have to forgive my ignorance on this. I don't know very much about Braille, raised print, or anything like that. So how long has Braille existed, first of all?
So that's a great question, and I should know the answer to that, but it was invented by Louis Braille, a Frenchman, I think sometime in the 1800s. Okay.
And so you see it on all kinds of things. You see it on signs, you see it in elevators, and there's books. And of course, I don't know Braille, but Louis Braille, he saw, right? He was able to see? Or was he blind also?
He was blind also.
He was blind, okay.
Yeah.
Wow, okay. Interesting. Now, when somebody's reading in Braille, do they read with one hand or do they read with both hands at the same time?
So typically read with one hand.
One hand, okay.
Yeah.
And does it matter which hand, using the right or the left?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
I don't believe so.
Huh. This is the kind of stuff and does the print go left to right?
It does.
Does it
The
go up and
characters go
down?
left to right.
Left to right. Okay.
Yeah. So the rays print the dots, and so the sequence of dots that form letters that have the meaning for different letters, and then those series of dots then combine to form words.
Wow. And then just by feel, they know immediately as they're feeling it what the letter is and how the words go together.
Yeah, I mean, I had no, I had a prior career in the corporate world, so I had no, I hadn't worked with visually impaired people, blind people before. Had really not a great familiarity, as you could tell, still to a certain extent with Braille. But it is amazing how quickly people can read and comprehend using Braille.
I'm fascinated by it because it seems, when I've touched a Braille sign before, I have no way of making sense of it at all. And so it seems like the kind of thing that would be really difficult to learn. But of course, I think just like we pick up letters if you have sight and you're able to look and see letters, you start to put it together. It becomes something that you learn, and it becomes very natural, almost second nature. But I'm so fascinated by it, the idea that there's this whole system and almost a secret code.
Yes, yeah, and I think it's like many other things. Typically, children are learning Braille early on. Children who are born blind or lose their vision early in life, so they learn Braille early on, and they pick it up. Like, we talked about kids learning languages today. And if a child learns a language, a second language early on, they have greater facility with it. So I think it's similar for Braille as well. And then what we're hearing and reading about and experiencing is that more people, as with our aging population, because of various ailments and diseases, there are more people who are losing vision later in life, and older people aren't going to learn Braille.
Sure.
One, it's because it's just more difficult, at a later age, and then also they don't have the sensory, they don't have the tactile sense to feel the dots. Yeah.
The fingers start to lose something as you get older.
That's right.
That's very true. So if the Xavier Society began in 1900, then you're starting, of course, with print and with resources for those who are visually impaired in print, raised print, eventually moving on to Braille. But as time has gone on, you've added certainly lots of other resources, not just those things that are in print.
That's right. So over time, we began recording books on records, long playing records, reel to reel, cassettes, never 8-track, but cassettes, and then on CDs more recently. And then in the last several years, then we converted our audiobook recordings to what's referred to as digital talking book technology. So essentially, the books are on flash drives, but the flash drives are encased in cartridges that can be played on devices that are provided free of charge by the National Library Service for the Blind and Print Disabled.
Okay.
So it's been estimated that the National Library Service for the Blind and Print Disabled is part of the Library of Congress. And it's been estimated that they've provided those talking book machines to over 500,000 people in the United States.
Wow.
So we made the decision a few years ago that we would make our audiobook content available and compatible with those digital talking book machines in order to reach more people.
Now, what is the difference between a digital talking book machine and, say, the Audible app on my phone?
So basically the devices that we send out, the cartridges, they're encrypted. So they can only be played on these machines.
Okay.
And that helped. And these machines are only provided to people who are certified as being blind or visually impaired. That helps us keep in line with the copyright laws. So as long as we're making books available in that encrypted format, we don't have to worry about the copyright laws in the United States.
Interesting. In that case, then the books that you're making available, are these public domain? Are they books that might not otherwise be available? Like, say somebody's taking a theology course, and there's a book that has not been printed in Braille or has not been recorded as an audiobook, but you've got a blind student who needs to study theology. So is that the kind of reason why you'd have it as something encrypted? I'm thinking about Audible and books on tape and things like going back a ways and how easy it was to read those books. But those, of course, are copyrighted too, and the publisher gives permission for them to be recorded. So this would be more of those books that maybe nobody was looking for an Audible format?
So typically, yeah, the books our policy, if something's otherwise available in audio, typically on Audible, we won't record the book because it's already available, and it's relatively inexpensive to get those audiobooks elsewhere. So we're providing titles that aren't otherwise available. So it might mean that they're more specialized. A lot of the content that we provide is related to the Catholic faith, not exclusively, but much of it is. Much of it is related to spirituality, inspirational titles. So again, I wouldn't say it's necessarily specialized, but it's not the type of books that you're going to see on the New York Times bestseller list.
Yeah, sure. Well, and even just Catholic book publishing itself is kind of a niche market. So there's a lot of things that sure wouldn't make it onto the New York Times bestseller. You're not even going to find it in your typical bookstore, but there's a tremendous need for it. And if that need can be met in this way, especially for let's say a niche market within a niche market, you've got your booksellers, then you've got your raised print Braille booksellers, and then you've got the Catholic booksellers and Catholic Braille booksellers. So even more, like, we're getting even more specialized as we go. So to have something that can really dig into those Catholic books that would need to be available to the visually impaired is that's really powerful. I like it.
Yeah, and again, so much of what we do is based upon the requests of our patrons, right? So that's what we try to fulfill, as many of those individual requests as we possibly can. And then much of what we still do goes back to our original mission, and that's providing workbooks and textbooks for children who are learning about their Catholic faith. So it's the workbooks and the resource books for the CCD classes. Okay. So we still do quite a number of those.
Yeah. And that's got to be an enormous help to parishes. If you think about the number of times a parish, your typical parish, is going to encounter a student with this particular need, I'm a parish priest now. I've been a pastor for 8 years. I've been a priest 15. I've never once had a student with that particular need. I've had some adults who I've encountered with visual issues who need some assistance, but I've not encountered a single student yet. To know that the Xavier Society is there to help with exactly that need. Here we've got the catechetical textbooks, we've got the Baltimore Catechism, we've got these things available. That's really wonderful.
Yeah, and that we're often approached by the teachers, right, or the parents of the children, which is great. So they hear about us through their parishes, or they often hear about us through any one of the schools for the blind across the country. They're requesting those books, and there are a lot of colleges and universities. They have their offices for disabled students, so they're supposed to make their best attempt and efforts to get textbooks for students and make those available in whatever accessible format is necessary for their students.
About how many people do you think the Xavier Society is serving on an annual basis?
So we say we have about 2,500 active patrons. Okay. So they may not be requesting, titles every month or every year, but they're requesting titles from us every other year or so, and some may very well be requesting titles on a monthly basis. But it's about 2,500 people that we serve on a regular basis. And then one of the other business lines that we have, if you would, it always sounds funny to me, but again, it's my corporate background coming into play. We provide the Sunday Mass propers in Braille. So essentially the missalette. And we provide that to about 700, 750 individuals each month. So we send out, each month we send out 4 weeks worth of the Mass propers. They go out to about 700, 750 individuals across the United States and in 20 countries outside the United States.
Wow. And I was looking on your website that it's the Xavier Society for the Blind.org, correct?
That's right.
Xavier Society for the Blind.org. Check it out. I was looking on the website, and you've got priests who you serve, blind priests.
That's
who
right.
are
Yes.
celebrating Mass and using the Missal in Braille and able to celebrate Mass that way. Again, this is my own ignorance, but these are things I was fascinated to find out as I was looking at your website. I didn't know that there were blind priests who would be served in this way. I know a priest who has since passed away, who, as he got older, his vision deteriorated tremendously, and he couldn't see eventually, but he always had his sight his whole life. But to learn about priests who are blind and who are doing this, it is fascinating.
Yeah, we're fortunate to have a wonderful spokesperson for Xavier Society. It's a young priest, Father Jamie Dennis from Owensboro, Kentucky, and he comes up, with the exception of the COVID year, he comes up to New York on December 13th, the Feast of St. Lucy, one of the patron saints of the blind, to celebrate our annual St. Lucy Mass with us. And he's been receiving materials from us in Braille since his time in the seminary.
Oh, wow.
So there are a number of other priests that receive our material, and a number of seminarians as well. Wow.
It's such an interesting space to be providing a service, and really truly something that I think would go unnoticed by most of us. Until I heard of the Xavier Society, I wouldn't have thought about this at all. And it strikes me as something so important and so necessary. And I'm embarrassed that I hadn't thought of it before. I was talking with a parishioner here who is blind, and I asked him, I said, I'm going to be doing this podcast with Malachy Fallon from the Xavier Society for the Blind. And he said, oh, the Xavier Society. I know the Xavier Society really well. And he was excited. He told me all about it and how he's benefited from the resources. And in fact, as he came into the church, he's a convert to Catholicism. And as he came into the church, the resources that Xavier was providing and how helpful they were. And then he was mentioning that with the proliferation of different technological things, there's so many more resources now for the visually impaired, so many more things that can help them. He said that the great thing that the Xavier Society provides is still the Braille resource, especially for Catholic literature, which is so often otherwise unavailable. But then how there's sort of an all ages component to this. You mentioned before that you have somebody who, as they get older, starts to gradually lose their sight and needs some more support, versus somebody who is blind from birth or from an early age. And of course, the resources that they'll need are different. To learn Braille at a young age or early on is one thing. To try to learn Braille later is a very different thing. So how do you bridge the gap between the different needs that are present within the visually impaired population? Because there are so many different things that would be needed. How are you able as a society to really try to meet each different need in the best way?
So, part of the issue, the challenge for us is just resources, financial resources. We're constrained. There's only so much we can do. We have a small staff. We only have five full-time employees. We do rely on volunteer readers and freelance audio engineers to help us with our audio books, and we also engage when needed a freelance Braille transcriber. We have a certified Braille transcriber on staff who is always busy.
I would imagine.
So, as I mentioned earlier, we try to fulfill as many requests as we can, but then we're always looking at new ways to serve more people. So moving to the digital talking book format, was a good example of that, right? So we had the sort of the widely accepted technology for, audiobooks in the United States. So we moved to that. We're also looking at ways to create books using text-to-speech technology. So we have a pilot project underway to see how close we can get the books to sounding like, human-read audiobooks or human-narrated audiobooks. Okay. And that would allow us to produce those audiobooks much more quickly. So as opposed to, currently, in order to, get to schedule the volunteer reader to work with an audio engineer, it can take sometimes 6 to 9 months to complete an audio book.
Wow.
So using the text to speech technology would help speed up that process.
Absolutely, yeah.
There are other technologies. We mentioned the paper Braille, but there are devices known as refreshable Braille devices. So we can send an electronic Braille file to someone, and they can download it on their device, which basically the dots come up on a board and keep refreshing as the file is being read by the device. So that allows people.
Wow.
It's much more efficient for us to send people books in Braille electronically. So we're not dealing with the paper and the volumes. Typically, if you look at a standard print book, the book in Braille could be 5 or 6, large volumes of Braille. So the
Sure.
Braille books are much bulkier. So it's more difficult for us in terms of managing the shipping, and then also for our patrons in terms of the receipt and storage of those books.
Again,
we're
I
making
feel
sure we can adapt to changes in technology.
I feel very ignorant here because I'm thinking to myself that Braille has to always be physical, has to always be on paper, has to always be something very literally tactile and so produced and then sent out as is. You're telling me that Braille has been digitized and
Correct.
can essentially be put onto a device, and that's just blowing my mind. How do you do that? How are they? I've got my phone here, and how does my phone have that capacity? That's incredible. I am fascinated by this idea. Now, is that a separate technology that they've created, or is this something that's like it's right on your iPhone or your Android or something? Or
so it's not going to be on your smartphone. So it's a separate device, and there are quite a number of these devices available. They have a variety of different features, and they're not inexpensive. Although there are a number of organizations out there that are piloting different devices to try to get all the most necessary features on the devices while keeping them as affordable as possible.
So these are devices that are made, broadly speaking, for the visually impaired to help them to read Braille and that can receive this kind of digital Braille text. So separate from your phone, but still giving you that is just. It is so fascinating.
Yeah,
that is so fascinating to me. I mean, when you look at
make yourself a note to look up at some point look up refreshable Braille devices, and you can get you'll see a video and see them in action. So it is quite amazing and quite fascinating.
Well, I was thinking about it every time if I have to travel someplace. I mean, I like to have a book to read, and there are certain books that I prefer to have as a physical book. Like I prefer to have my breviary as a physical book. There's something about the interaction that a human person has with a physical book, turning the page, the feel of the book in your hand, the smell of the book, and then of course just the print that's on the page. I kind of prefer that, especially for prayer. But if I'm just reading a book, or if I've got to travel and I don't want to have a whole lot of stuff with me, the Kindle has been a great thing. It's just some kind of an e-reader. It's so wonderful to have, because you can bring a whole lot of literature with a very, very small device and not much going on. So it's kind of a nice thing. Again, I'm feeling very ignorant. I've never thought about that for someone who is visually impaired, who needs Braille, because of how big a physical Braille book would have to be, or how many volumes there would have to be. And that they've invented something that can bring Braille right to you as a portable. That is device, fantastic.
Great strides with the technology, for sure. And it's interesting also what what you just said, because I think the same debate is ongoing in the blind community in terms of physically having Braille, right? With all the technology that's available for blind and visually impaired people, text to audio, screen readers on their computer, the read aloud. I mean, even in Word, Microsoft Word, you can get a document and then have it read aloud, on your computer. So there's lots of technology out there that people can use to listen to books or to listen to content. But there's this debate about children learning Braille, having the physical experience of reading Braille, and how that helps. Just like, and I feel the same way as you do for certain books. I want to hold the book. I want to have the book in print. I feel that I have better comprehension, right, and better retention if I'm reading the book as opposed to listening to an audio book. So that same sort of debate is ongoing as it relates to Braille in the blind community.
Now, is that something that becomes also sort of cultural or maybe subcultural? I don't know. Again, I'm trying to think of some kind of a corollary. It would seem like teaching Braille is going to be of value no matter what, because a device breaks, power goes out, you lose your internet connection. There's something that makes it impossible for you to use the electronic device that's going to give you that. But so having the physical ability to read in Braille would seem to be a really wise choice, but also something that's of a cultural value. There's almost a secret to this way of reading and seeing things that the sighted population doesn't have access to. And there's something beautiful about that. There's something beautiful about this unique component of this population within the population.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. Yeah, and it's using different senses and feeling the words. So it's obviously it's a very different experience.
Yeah. Well, it gets me thinking about things like I was watching the other night. We had our middle school youth group was gathering, and the kids were checking in, and they just signed their names next to their printed name. And a lot of these kids have not learned how to write in cursive, because a lot of their schools have stopped teaching cursive. And this is the thing that for me is I don't understand why in the world schools have decided that cursive doesn't matter anymore. To me, it seems like an enormous educational mistake to give kids that sensory skill and this particular way of doing it. And so you see kids who have learned cursive on their own, or their parents have tried to teach them, but they only have certain letters. And so they'll write a few letters in cursive, and then they stop and they print the next letter, and then they go back to cursive. And so they're, even when they sign their name, it's sort of this broken, semi-printed, semi-cursive. And I think, what are we losing by not teaching the kids cursive? Like, what's being lost? There's something to the culture. And even think of it as like a rite of passage. Do you remember when you were allowed to use an ink pen?
Oh
in
yeah,
school.
yeah,
Like you start off, you were only allowed to use pencil, and
yeah.
then you got to that point where like here's your ink pen, and it was
Yeah.
amazing. I remember
Yep. Third grade at Resurrection Ascension School in Rego Park, Queens, and Mrs. Oakley's class. So I remember it
See,
very well, like it was
see,
yesterday.
yes. See, I didn't get a pen until fourth grade. At St. James School in Stratford with Mrs. Jordan, and it was an erasable pen. See, I don't know if they had erasable pens in your time, but we got the erasable pen, and it was terrible. An erasable pen is an abomination. But then you get the real thing later on.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you bring that up as well, because part of what I do is fundraising, and so oftentimes I'll be participating in webinars or seminars on different fundraising techniques. And one of the things, I was on a seminar a couple of years ago, and the facilitator was just talking about the importance of handwritten thank you notes. That is just so important, and it really, people really appreciate that and recognize the time it takes to do that, and really personalizing it, right, in cursive.
Yes.
Still has a great deal of meaning.
I have a friend of mine who listens to this show who's going to be very glad that you just said that, because she's always after me about writing thank you notes. And so, Liz will be very, very grateful that you talked about the personalized note.
Forgive me, Father. I didn't mean to create more work for you.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. That's the thing. I have a priest friend, and he's the master of the thank you note. We had an event, and he came to it, and it seemed like the next day. It was actually 2 days later, but the thank you note arrived. And I just couldn't believe how quick he was to get the thank you note. And handwritten, very neat penmanship, but it was the handwritten. It was so personal. There's something to that. And I think as Catholics, right, we talk about the incarnation. And so the incarnate aspect of our being, that we are bodily, and so the senses matter. And so if we're talking about writing something, to be able to write in script, to be able to write and to know that there's something about me that now is on the page. But then likewise, I'm thinking Braille. Now you're opening my mind and my eyes to this gift of Braille, and what an incredible thing that it's physical, tactile. It requires a skill to learn to be able to read it. It's something that is so particular, it could easily be lost.
Yeah.
And especially if it starts to be replaced by technology.
Right.
It could easily be lost, and I think we would be poorer to lose it. Just like we see this happening now with different languages. As different languages are not being taught, a culture starts to die out, and the language also dies with it. And the importance of keeping languages alive, that a language is valuable in itself.
Yeah. And, for many of our patrons, when they talk about the Mass propers in Braille in particular, so it allows them to follow along, to actively participate in Mass, right? To respond, to, hear the prayers, to say the prayers, to respond, is very important to them. So it allows them to actively practice their faith in their parish community. And then quite a number of our patrons also serve as lectors in their parishes.
Really?
So, without the paper Braille, Mass propers, they wouldn't be able to do that. So, other devices, you can't picture, using any other sort of device in order to enable people to participate in that way.
Yeah. I'm still just kind of stuck on the idea that there's an electronic Braille machine that will give you in a portable way a constantly renewing screen, basically to read. It is the most incredible thing. I can't even imagine coming up with such a technology. And
and I can imagine in 10 years, I mean, things are improving all the time. So there's great hope that, these devices will continue to improve. Like any technology, the price will continue to come down. the use will be more widespread
Yeah.
without really losing, the experience of reading Braille.
Yeah. Now, with the Xavier Society, is the Xavier Society a nonprofit?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Nonprofit. Okay. And so, where does
Well,
most of your funding come from? How are you raising the money?
So we rely on individuals, both in terms of our direct appeal campaigns, direct mail campaigns. So individuals making gifts, on an annual basis or several times a year. We rely on those individuals also to remember us in their estates, in their wills. So over the years, people have been very generous to Xavier Society in their estates with bequests. We have a number of smaller foundations and family foundations that have an affinity for Catholic organizations or organizations that serve blind and visually impaired people. So everything that we do is supported by donations and fundraising, and we don't charge anything for the content, the books, materials that we provide.
That was my next question. Do you charge for it? I think that's wonderful that you're able to give this away for free.
Yeah, so that's been our mission all along. So we've never charged our patrons. We do have generous patrons who will make donations and make gifts to Xavier Society, but we don't charge for any of the materials that we provide.
Wow, that's great. Now, I would imagine that let's say your most popular items would be things like the Bible and the Mass propers, to be able to follow along with the Mass. That would seem like also a spot where there's just a tremendous need. I want to be able to read along with the readings as they're being read. I want to be able to read along with the prayers and to understand them better. First of all, are those actually your best sellers, as it were?
So, good guess. Yes. So the Mass propers, the Bible, the Catechism are always at the top of the list. A lot of books on prayer, and different prayers, different prayer books for the different seasons, of the Catholic Church. I'm looking at the bookshelf behind you.
Yeah.
And the Bible, Old and New Testament in Braille, would fill probably two of those.
Oh my goodness!
It's about 39 volumes of Braille.
Wow.
So it's a lot. So a few years ago, at one point when people requested the Bible in Braille, we sent them the whole Bible, Old and New Testament, and then we realized that that's somewhat impractical. So now people can request individual books, either from the Old Testament or New Testament,
and they can sort of put together the pieces as they go along.
Correct.
And really dive into this. That's wow. I mean, that's a lot of books.
It is.
That's a lot of books. And
it is. It is.
It would seem like that. Yeah, that would become almost cost prohibitive too, just to try to send that out. That emphasizes, I think, then the generosity of your donors that they're giving this, and you've been able for 120 something years now to give away all these resources to the people who need them.
That's right.
Incredible.
And so one of the other things, getting back to one of your original questions and observations, so it's like we're always looking at new technologies and new ways to serve our patrons, but we've also taken a look back recently. So a few years ago, we stopped providing some of our materials in large print. And when I say large print, it's not typically the large print, the font size that you would see in large print books in bookstores, or books that you receive through Amazon or the like. So it's a lot larger. The font is typically 22 point or so it's very large font. So for financial reasons, we stopped doing that a few years ago, but we're beginning to reintroduce large print for a number of our offerings. So we're starting once again with the Bible, and making that available, because people can download it in a large print format on their devices. So initially we're making it available for download, and we're also now looking at ways to and potentially partners to have it printed in large print to provide the paper, the print version of the Bible in large. So while we're always looking ahead, there's certain things from the past that we want to be able to continue to do or reintroduce, and large print is one of the areas that we're looking at now again.
Well, and that's bridging the gap between the different types of needs, right? That
correct.
Somebody who is fully blind would need the Braille, but somebody who is losing their sight or who maybe is they're at least able to see something, the large print would be the big help for them.
Right. Can't learn Braille, not ready for all audio. So the large print is a nice bridge.
Yeah.
Good solution.
Yeah, and then to be able to provide it emphasizes the full mission, that this mission of the Xavier Society is broad in its scope. We're looking to take care of the visually impaired, whether they are blind, partially blind, legally blind, or simply are struggling with their sight. To be able to cover all those bases is incredible.
Yeah. So one of the phrases we hear more and more of is talking about referring to people who are either no vision or low vision, right? So there's sort of a whole spectrum of people in terms of where their vision is.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, and I guess kind of culturally now we're in this place where we want to use the correct terms when we talk about different things. Am I going to need to apologize for anything I've said so far? Are we okay in the way that we've talked about this?
So it all sounds fine to me. Father.
Okay. Because I think it's important that, we talk about visually impaired, low vision or no vision. These are actually, again, you're teaching me things today. This is great. But to know that and to know how to best approach that subject. This is actually an area I was saying to you before we started recording that in an article that I was reading recently, they pointed out sometimes in the church we talk about marginalized communities, and we might go to sort of an easy example, but often when we do that, we're ignoring a community that could very, very easily be, if not marginalized with any intention, marginalized by lack of access. And it's a lack of access that comes because most of our churches are not really well suited to taking care of our disabled brothers and sisters. And that's physical accessibility. In some cases, you have very old churches built in certain places where there's just no possibility of renovating or doing anything, adding an elevator, for example. There's not much in the way of, I can't really think of too many places. You always see them on TV and in videos, but I don't know any parish in my area that has a mass for the deaf or the hearing impaired. And then
so occasionally you'll see people, the using sign language during the mass. But no, it's a challenge. One of the things that I often talk about was the first year that I was executive director at Xavier Society. We had our St. Lucy Mass at St. Patrick's Cathedral. So not on the main altar, but the Lady Chapel behind the main altar, which is a smaller worship space. And December 13th, 7 p.m. Mass, Midtown Manhattan, Fifth Avenue, across from Rockefeller Center, Christmas season.
Yeah.
And our patrons got there. And it's not easy. So that made an impact on me right away. I mean, it was very, apparent to me just how difficult, it was for our patrons to get there. But
they would have had to come to one of the most. They would have had to come to one of the most crowded places you can possibly go to at one of the most crowded times of year, and then into a very crowded cathedral, because even in the evening, St. Patrick's is still buzzing and there's all kinds of stuff going. And then they have to get all the way to one of the most crowded areas of the cathedral, because that chapel, if you're doing a special event there, that chapel's not big. You're right. It's not a large place.
It's not easy to find. And so we moved. We did that. Once I started, we did it there we had it there 2 years, and then we moved to St. Francis Xavier Church on 16th Street. So back to where we started, just simply because it was a little easier to get to and from, and it's a midday mass now. And we were running out of space in the Lady Chapel, not only because of our patrons, but because of their dogs as well. And you don't often think about the guide dogs. So
right.
Yeah, so a whole nother challenge there.
Wow. Well, as we talk about this accessibility and the things that are kind of needed in the church, whether it's physical space so that the guide dog can be there, planning so that the time of day is useful for people, or the location is not going to be so overly crowded and congested that it's difficult to get to the spot. What would you recommend for parishes in terms of creating that accessibility, even if it's not something that they necessarily need all the time, right?
So I think, and a good example is St. Francis Xavier. So they have volunteers that are available to assist people who are disabled. So if someone's coming to Mass and there's an issue, whether it's blindness, deafness, if there are mobility issues, they can get in touch with the parish staff and have someone there to assist during Mass. So I think that's it sounds like an easy thing. Not a lot of investment is necessary for something like that. And I think it's just also then being more mindful, it's the awareness, right? We have a patron. She's a wonderful, wonderful, delightful woman, and she lectures at her parish quite often. And she had told me a story that she really wanted to read at the Easter Vigil. And she'd been doing this, Sunday masses on a regular basis, but wanted to read at the Easter Vigil. And the parish, the pastor had said, well, the Easter Vigil, we do that by candlelight, and it might be difficult for you with the low lighting. So this is a woman who's completely blind reading Braille. The lighting is not going to make a difference. But it was just sort of that lack of awareness.
Sure.
So.
No, that's a great point. Now, I know one thing that I've seen sometimes with parishioners who have different needs, whether they're not able to see, or a physical disability where they're in a wheelchair or a walker or something. I see sometimes my ushers, they want to help, and there's also a little bit of nerves to approach and offer that help, because they don't want to be imposing and they don't want to be disrespectful. And at the same time, there's a genuine desire to serve and to assist someone, but they also want to be very sensitive, because they know that these folks made it there somehow on their own. Mm-hmm. They're clearly very capable. Any advice for that? How do you tactfully and kindly, politely offer the support and the help, knowing that it might not be needed or wanted?
That's it. So I think that's it. You say, would you like assistance? Do you need assistance? May I offer you some assistance? Is there anything, I can do for you? And oftentimes people will be happy, and I've gotten to know some of our patrons, pretty well, and see them on a regular basis. And so now I can say, well, do you want to grab an elbow, right? So
yeah.
to help escort them, particularly in an area that's unfamiliar to them. I think for the most part, if people are familiar with an area, a building, a facility. It's amazing what they can do. I have an example. One of our board members, he's got a degenerative eye disease. He's a relatively young man. He spends some of his time in London, and I happened to be over there, and we were meeting with someone from the Church of England about ministering to disabled individuals in one of the parishes in the Diocese of London. And so my board member, after we finished, we had lunch and we had a couple of calls and things like that. He wanted to escort me to the tube station, just to make sure that I got to the right place and I got to where I needed to be. So some people do have a great sense of independence, but certainly many recognize if assistance is available, they're happy to have it. They just don't want to. They don't want to feel like they're being needy. So I think it's just a matter of how the assistance is offered.
It's interesting that you bring up that example of wanting to make you comfortable and make sure that you got to where you needed to be, and then said, "I'll take you there. Let me show you the way." My great aunt, God rest her soul, she was a Sister of Mercy, and she had macular degeneration, and so as she got older, her eyesight was going more and more. She used to send me notes, and she would always apologize for her handwriting, and it was perfect. And she was a Sister of Mercy, so she had perfect Palmer penmanship,
Sure,
she was always apologizing for how it was getting sloppy, and it's still better than anything I could ever write. But I went to visit her at the nursing home where she was, and she was sitting in a room, and I came over and I sat down next to her, and I started to talk to her, and I had to tell her that I was there and who I was. And she took my hand and she said, "Get me out of here." I said, "Well, where do you want to go?" She goes, Let's get out of this room. I don't want to be here anymore. We'll go to another part of the building." I said, "Okay." I had never been to this place before. And she said, "Just get me to the door." So I got her to the door, and she's, "All right, now let's turn left." So we turned left and we go down the hall. Turn first left. We turned left again. We're going down basically a service corridor. There's stuff in the hallway everywhere. And she goes, "The elevator's right up here on the right." And sure enough, there was the elevator. So get me on the elevator. So we got on the elevator. Second floor. Okay, second floor. Turn right off the elevator. She knew exactly where to go. She just needed to make sure that she could get there. And I was fascinated by this because she navigated the halls better than I possibly could have navigated them.
Oh, yeah.
And she couldn't see a thing.
Yeah.
It was amazing. She just needed a hand to steady her. So I'm really fascinated by these kinds of things. One of the questions that I ask all of the guests on the tangent is what advice you would give to a priest. Now I want to kind of specify that in this context, in the context of what you've been talking about, Malachy, with the Xavier Society for the Blind. For a priest helping someone who's visually impaired, for a priest helping someone with any kind of particular challenge, what would you want them to know? What would you want that priest to know? And how would you want them to serve that person?
So I think it goes back to a little bit about what we were just talking about, is that people want to be as independent as they can be. They just need, occasionally to have an accommodation, or just, there needs to be an awareness that, the materials may not be available in Braille, right, or in accessible formats. People want to be involved in their parish life. They want to come and say the prayers and responses, along with the rest of the congregation. They want to be able to, participate as lectors in the Mass. So I think initially, it probably takes a little bit of effort to kind of figure out what's necessary. But once that's done, my experience with our patrons, they're very committed, they're very determined, and they're very independent. So I think the rewards, will be great. Another example that I often give is that one of our patrons, and he reads at Mass in his church all the time, And he loves to tell people, that people come up from the congregation afterwards and say, I just love when you're doing the readings because you make such great eye contact with people in the pews, because he doesn't need to look down at
Right.
at the readings. So they there are different gifts that our patrons can bring to their parishes and their communities. So it's important to recognize and remember that as well.
Beautiful. Well, I love the idea of making that invitation, almost recognizing the gifts that somebody might have, and not assuming something. You talked about the Easter Vigil and the concern that with the low lighting, it might be difficult for you. I think sometimes we priests, we kind of make the decision on our own for somebody, and it might be good for us to offer or to ask, make the invitation first, and then worry about what comes from that. Yeah. Wow. Well, Malachy, you've been really generous with your time. I'm very, very grateful to you. Can people give online to the Xavier Society? If they go to xaviersocietyfortheblind.org, would they be able to find a donate button?
Yes, they can. And all the information is they can donate that way, or if they feel more comfortable dropping a check in the mail, all the information that they need to do that is there. If anybody who hears this podcast would like to get additional information, in addition to going to our website, we have an 800 number and we have a client services coordinator. The 800 number is 800-637-9193. That's 800-637-9193. And our client services coordinator, Saul, would be happy to help them through the process of getting registered with us and finding out more about what's in our catalog and what materials they might want to receive from us.
Outstanding. Malachy, thank you. And thank you for the work that Xavier Society is doing. It's really tremendous and beautiful to see. And I'm so grateful for what you're doing and for the time that you've given us on the tangent today.
Well, great. Father, thank you so much for the opportunity. And hopefully we'll see each other at the Rose Hill Gym at a Fordham basketball game soon.
Amen. Yeah, we should have talked about that. Yeah, Malachy and I are both Fordham grads. This is great. Xavier Society for the Blind, xaviersocietyfortheblind.org. Malachy, thank you again. It's been great having you.
Sure. Thanks very much, Father. Take care now.
Thanks for listening, everyone. As always, you can find The Tangent wherever you get your podcasts on veritascatholic.com. You can also listen to us on the radio, 103.9 FM, 1350 AM. You can find out more about the Xavier Society for the Blind at xaviersocietyfortheblind.org. I'm Father Sam Kachuba. Unfortunately not joined by my co-host Matt Sporazza this week, but he'll be back next week. God bless you.